Let's go on to these last thoughts on Islam, okay? The Quran speaks of the three great faith communities of the people of the book as of equal value, which is interesting. God gives each of them its own way and its own order, sharat, and delays judgment until the last day. The three religions are supposed to compete for the good and each to strive in faithfulness to its own tradition. Again, you read the Quran, and like the Bible, it's a rich and complex book, and so some of this is really quite positive. And to you, we have revealed the book with the truth. It confirms the scriptures which came before it, and stands as a guardian over them. Therefore give judgment among men according to God's revelations, and do not yield to their whims or swerve from the truth made known to you. We have ordained a law and assigned a path for each of you. Had God pleased, he would have made of you one community, but it is his wish to prove you by that which he has bestowed upon you. Vie with each other in good works, for to God shall you all return, and he will resolve your differences for you. Well, that's interesting. Kind of a positive spin. Well, we'll figure it out at the end. We'll see who wins in the end. We're not sure at this point. I think that's probably early Islam, myself. Pretty early, pretty positive. Okay, we're all people of the book. We all share a common story. God will figure this out in the end. Let's go on. One of the verses most quoted by Muslims in conversation with Christians is, "There shall be no compulsion in religion." Most scholars believe these verses date from the early period of Muhammad's prophetic career, when he still harbored the hope that Jews and Christians would freely accept his prophetic status. Later in the prophet's career, he turned furiously on the Jews and Christians who rejected him and began to preach that they must be conquered by force. Accordingly, a large number of Quranic texts insist that fighting the unbeliever is mandatory. The same surah that proclaims that there is no compulsion in religion also contains this directive: fight against them until idolatry is no more and Allah's religion reigns supreme. Again, it's complicated. Which part do you emphasize? I think there's a lot of moderate Muslims would be cringing at this conversation today. Let's just say that out loud. But it's there, and so it's part of that tradition that we have to sort out, we have to try to understand as we engage in dialogue with Muslims and people of the Muslim faith.
Vern, but this is the source of radical Islam?
Well, I don't know if that's the only source, but there's things like that that certainly contribute to it. Put it that way. Yeah.
Aren't they trying to teach their young people that? I mean, over in these strong Islamic countries.
You know, are they trying to teach that to young people? I think it's as varied among them, Muslims, as it is among Christians.
I don't mean here, but I mean,
What part do you start with? What parts do you emphasize? It's a lot of variety. And again, we can pick things that paint a picture that looks quite dire. And some of these passages, though, I bring up because they're there, and we at least have to know what they are. But again, there's a lot of moderate Muslims, and I'm guessing the Muslim tonight, if he comes back, will have an opinion of these texts. And so we'll talk about it.
Well, why don't they speak out for, I guess, retaliation?
Yeah, and I would think that they probably speak out more in some cultures where it's safer. And other places, yeah, they're afraid of retaliation. They really are.
Why don't we speak out?
Well, that's what we're trying to do. Why don't we speak out more?
And we only hear one side on the, I mean, mostly.
Yeah,
That's what that makes good news.
yeah. I think,
Sensationalize it.
yeah, we're going to read some things next week, but I think there's more moderate Muslims that speak out than we realize. But we tend to get a westernized version of some of that. Yes?
One of the things that's been coming out was why don't we get Al Jazeera, the TV's
Al Jazeera, yeah.
over here, so that we would get a better,
More complete picture?
yes.
Yeah. Good question. I can't answer that.
You can go to their website.
Go to their website. I would think it's online.
It probably is, but what they were saying is that it ought to be universally, easily to come across, rather than having to go on the website.
Yeah. Let's go on. Good questions, though. Dawah in Islam is understood as an invitation of faith. Others are invited to become Muslim, for Muslims are the best of peoples, evolved for mankind enjoying what is right, forbidding what is wrong, and believing in Allah. According to strict Islamic teaching, conversion from Islam to another faith, including Christianity, is seen as falling away from God, punishable by death. Muslims believe that everyone will face God's judgment and must give an account of their deeds. Now again, I'm guessing that you could probably fall away in the United States and it'd be much different than falling away in Saudi Arabia. The culture and the context is very critical when it comes to that. And again, it's a big, complicated book, and sometimes some traditions are going to interpret them and spiritualize these things in a way where it doesn't have to be literal. And so suddenly there's not people walking around with targets on their backs. You read the story, perhaps, that I passed out last week of a Muslim that's become a Christian now. And he's still alive, and he's allowed to write what he did. So hopefully it's not actual death for a number of people.
Is that related to honor killings?
You know, a lot of the honor killings that I've heard have more to do with personal, family kind of matters.
Falling away, they feel
Yeah.
falling away from the faith.
I think it can, but or doing things that dishonor a family. Dishonor a family. Yeah. Let's go on. I'm going to skip the next paragraph. We're getting to the end. If you ask a Muslim what will happen to him when he dies, he will answer, only God knows. Muslims do not have the assurance of salvation because Islam does not give them a promise of salvation. As a matter of fact, the word salvation is unknown to them. They are judged on the basis of their deeds. And you can read the next part when you get home. The concept of Allah's love in the Quran is tied to obedience. Because of this, Muslims sometimes doubt the love of Allah toward them. The Quran records 24 times that Allah does not love sinners, but only those who fear Him. Allah's love is only for unbelievers or for believers. Allah is an enemy to those who reject faith. The forgiveness of Allah is also uncertain. One hadith tells of a time when Khadijah, the wife of Muhammad, asked him to forgive her sins. He replied that he was not sure if his own sins were forgiven. How could he then forgive her sins? Then again, at several places in the Quran, God's mercy is promised to those who are penitent. And finally, many Muslims have little knowledge of the Quran. It is written in Arabic and must be read in its original language. Only 20% of the world's Muslims speak or understand Arabic. Thus, they rely heavily on clerics to interpret the Quran for them. Local mullahs.
Sounds like the early Catholic Church.
It sounds like Martin Luther, doesn't it? Martin Luther translating the Bible into German so that people can understand it.
Are there services in Arabic?
Yes, their prayers are in Arabic. And I think there's some people that understand it obviously better than others. It sounds like catechization for some of us. We learned those things. We didn't necessarily always understand those things, did we? And I can't speak for all Muslims everywhere, but I think they can be, when you have a lot of people that aren't able to read in the original language and understand it in the original language, then you're very much dependent on the clerics. And if the clerics are hotbeds of revolt, then you're going to get local hotbeds of activism sometimes, the results from that. Again, I'm painting with a broad brushstroke here. There's plenty of local leaders that I'm sure want nothing more than for people to live in submission to Allah and be obedient in their lives. But you can begin to see where the clerics become almost overly influential at a local setting. And who knows what that might lead to sometimes. The answer to that is never trust what a preacher says. Okay, I didn't mean that totally. But you get the idea. I mean, you all have the Bible. You all have access to the internet. You all have so much exposure to things that just makes you different. It makes you, if I say something up here that you disagree with, you're either going to disagree or at least be suspect. You're going to ask questions. Or talk about me in the parking lot. And that happens. But that's part of what we have going for us in a way that many Muslims around the world do not have, I think. We've covered a lot of ground. We didn't solve all the answers, but good things are talked about. We will talk next week about radical fundamentalism as it shows up. And we will talk about jihad as it shows up in the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. And we'll talk about a lot of things related to what we see in the world today. And everything will be clear after that. So, go in peace, create a place for all to belong.